Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunchbox Talk with the North Carolina Botanical Garden. I'm Lauren Green, Youth Environmental Education Specialist here at the Garden. Today, we are excited to bring you Chad Washburn of the Naples Botanical Garden in Florida, who will be sharing his talk, Form and Function, an Ecological Approach to Stormwater Using Native Plants. We would like to thank our Fall 2021 Lunchbox Talk event host, Damon Waite, for supporting our Fall Lunchbox Talk series at the Dogwood level. Lunchbox Talk event hosts provide funds that support program planning, accessibility, and reach of these talks. David Michaud is my partner in moderation today. He will be assisting our speaker with Q&A. Chad Washburn is the Vice President of Conservation at Naples Botanical Garden and is responsible for development of the garden's plant conservation strategy and implementation of the program. He leads the conservation and natural resources team, focusing on projects that ensure the long-term survival of the flora and ecosystems of South Florida and the Caribbean region, and acts as the Secretariat for the Caribbean and Central American Botanic Garden Network through Botanic Gardens Conservation International. We've put a link in the chat to the Naples Botanical Garden if you'd like to learn more. Thank you for joining us today, Chad.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this virtual Lunchbox Talk and spending time with us today. I'm going to talk about an ecological approach to stormwater using native plants, and this fits in really well with your garden there, the North Carolina Botanical Garden. I want to start by just looking at the mission of your garden to inspire understanding, appreciation, and conservation of plants, and to advance a sustainable relationship between people and nature. That's really what the focus of today's talk is about. That relationship, the last part of that statement, of the mission statement, that relationship between people and nature and how we can work to make that more sustainable. So no matter where we live, if you live in a forested area or within a planned development, or even in a densely populated city, there's an interface with nature in some way. And what we do on our landscape outside of our homes and in our communities can have significant impacts downstream in some of those natural areas. So what I want to do today is challenge you to think about that. And with that, I'd like to start with a question for the chat. Do you know where excess water that falls on your property ultimately ends up? If you do, please put that in the chat. I'm curious to see if you know, because quite often that's not something that we know. I had to go search through my neighborhood to find that, look at maps. So I'll begin with some context. I work at Naples Botanical Garden, and we're located in the coastal community of Naples, Florida, at the southwestern tip of the peninsula. Zooming in a little bit, you can see that the relationship, especially for us, between people and nature is really evident. And you can see this in this aerial photo of the garden. The garden is outlined in yellow. The southern end of our property, the southwest end of our property, leads to the Gulf of Mexico. So going back to that connection between people and nature, how we manage our landscapes in the garden has a direct impact on the waters in the Gulf of Mexico. And the area that you see on the left side of your screen, that is part of the Gulf of Mexico. In a similar way, in many of our communities, what we do in our yard, just like the garden, connects directly with the environment in some way. And that's not always something that's clear and evident. This example that I've got on the screen, it's very clear and evident. This is an aerial photo from Google Maps, and this is from Fort Myers, Florida. This is a real photo. This is just north of the garden. And you can see each of those little individual squares, those are individual homes. And the black areas and dark green areas, that's water. Many of these homes are on the water of some sort. Some of the water areas that you see in here, the dark areas, are stormwater ponds, and others are canals. You can see on the right side of your screen, these lead out to larger bodies of water and ultimately to the Gulf of Mexico. Nearly all of the landscapes in this community look like this. This is what the back of the yard looks like that connects to those bodies of water. It's turf grass right down to the edge of the water. Everything that happens on the land in a landscape like this, and I'm talking things like nutrients from fertilizers, pet waste, herbicides and insecticides, and even just soap from washing our cars, eventually makes it downstream into the natural areas. And when that happens, we face more serious ecological issues like the one you see here. This is a real image. I did not adjust the color at all. This was from a blue-green algal bloom in 2016. And what you see in bright green there, that's algae growing in the water, an explosive growth of algae that we call an algal bloom. And the article that this picture was from described the water as thick, pea green, and foul smelling. It is intensely toxic and poses health risks to people and wildlife in the area. That was a really attention-grabbing byline or story in this article. This bloom was, you can see it in the image, looks bright green in this area. This bloom was 33 square miles in size. That's roughly the size of the city of Miami. So things like this aren't just news stories that are coming out of Southwest Florida and Florida. It's a global issue, and it's something that many of our communities around the world are facing. So I did a real quick Google search and found this news article about a bloom in North Carolina. And this is just from this summer. This was a bloom that was in the tributaries around Waterville Lake in Haywood County. And we know that blooms like this one in North Carolina have been happening for years, and many of them are natural algal blooms, these explosive growths of algae. But we also know that many times they're made many times worse by pollutants. And the big pollutant for that is excess nutrients. They make these blooms so much larger, they make them last for a much longer period of time. They make them much more devastating. As a scientist, I don't just take everything I read for fact. I want to do more research. I want to study this. So really looking at the literature, but also experimenting. I wanted to see just how much blooms like this can be exacerbated by nutrients. So for this, I took a mixed sample from one of our garden's lakes, and I mixed it up really well in one jar. And then I poured part of it into each of these two different jars. In one of them, I placed a few grains of liquid fertilizer, that stuff that is like sand grains, and eventually as it mixes with the water, turns into a liquid fertilizer. And I left these two jars in the sun for about a week. And you can see the difference in the two samples right away. The one on the right just had a couple grains of liquid fertilizer in it, and it turned into this green mess. Really shows what just a small amount of fertilizer can do to an algal bloom. In fact, these blue-green algal blooms in freshwater and the red tide, which is another form of algal bloom that happens in saltwater, have become so prevalent that we now have two different warning systems to alert us here in Florida when we have outbreaks. So this one that you see on the screen is from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and this alerts us to blue-green algal blooms. These happen in fresh water, and you can see these blue dots. These are areas where we've had algal blooms in the past 30 days. So Lake Okeechobee, we've had these incredible algal blooms the algae blooms, and then as it dies and decomposes, we get these fish kills, and it's really devastating to the environment. And then that goes further downstream. When those algal blooms in Lake Okeechobee are washed out to the Gulf, we have other problems. We get red tide, this red algal bloom that occurs in the Gulf of Mexico. Then we use this map from the Florida Fish and Wildlife, and it alerts us to red tide blooms. So if you live here in Southwest Florida or visit us, this is a website that you use every time you go to the beach. It lets us know of beach areas where red tide is present. And if you were to go visit some of these areas where there's some really tiny red and orange dots on here, they're a little difficult to see, but if you visit these, you'll likely start coughing and have respiratory irritation from the red tide, from this algal bloom. Again, this algal bloom is fed by excess nutrients from our lawns. Quite often, if you visit these beaches where you see the red spots, the red dots, They're littered with dead fish and other aquatic life. This includes life all the way up the food chain to manatees and dolphins. It's really not something you want to see when you go to visit the beach. And when something happens in this scale, as an individual, all of us in this presentation, it can feel helpless. It's really easy to feel helpless that you can't make a positive impact on something that's so large. For us, it's as large as the Gulf of Mexico. Now, for you, it's as large as many of the lakes surrounding your communities. But I am happy to say that we can take very active steps. Each one of us can take active steps to address this problem. With that in mind, I'm going to go back to the landscape that each of us has within our own yards and within our communities. Here in Florida, many of our properties are waterfront properties, but I'll talk about others that aren't waterfront. Waterfront property, I live in a community that looks like this. This is actually a picture from my backyard. I'm working with my community to make a change here. This pond is not a natural pond. It's a man-made stormwater pond, and it looks like this. The lawn goes all the way down to the water's edge, and there's no buffer. So all of the fertilizer that goes on these lawns, all of the grass clippings when the yards are mowed, all of the pet waste, all of that goes right into the stormwater pond. And then as we get rains, it flushes out into the canals, rivers, and streams, and then goes out to the Gulf of Mexico. So that's that nexus, going back to North Carolina Botanical Gardens' mission, that nexus between people and our environment. We really have an opportunity here to use native plants to make a change in how we manage stormwater. Here in Florida, we also face this issue of having a dry season during the winter months. And this is when many of our part-time residents from the north return to Naples. We call them snowbirds. And many times they find their backyard looks like this around their stormwater pond. This is an area, I took this photo, this is an area with $500,000 homes. And when they come back, they're very upset that they have to look at this during their time here. This may not seem significant in terms of ecological importance, but it's an aesthetic nightmare. And it's one that we can improve by native plants. This could easily be a beautiful stormwater pond. And that's that form side. We want to make these look beautiful. So plantings at the edge of this pond could effectively hide what I lovingly call ring around the tub. It's this brown ring that we get during the dry season. So native plantings can add both function and form to our stormwater areas. In many of our communities, and you face this there in North Carolina, we have these. This is a grass bowl. This is behind one of our shopping centers here. And next time you visit a shopping complex there that has a lot of paved area, parking lots especially, take a look around, drive around the parking lot, around the back of the building. You can usually find something like this hidden in the back of the property. This is a retention basin, a dry retention basin. So all of the rainwater from the parking lot picks up pollutants and drains to this dry retention area during a storm. Unfortunately, it also picks up fertilizers and grass clippings. It's a turf area, and quite often it gets fertilized and mown. Picks up all of those pollutants. So this is designed as a stormwater area, but it actually adds pollutants to the system. Without this being designed as an ecosystem with plants and form and function, it really does not provide the ecological function to remove pollutants. I would also argue that without plantings, this is not beautiful. It's not something we want to look at. That's why many times these are hidden in the back of the property. With all this in mind, we designed our stormwater here at the garden to have both form and function. This is an image of a man-made stormwater lake that we planted here at the garden. And this image is of the pond, the lake, just about 2 years after we created it and planted it. This is in juxtaposition to those images that I showed earlier with turf grass right down to the edge that most of our community has here in Southwest Florida. We also incorporated stormwater wetlands across our site and planted them with native plants. These are essentially giant versions of rain gardens. For example, this is our river of grass, and it's an homage to the Everglades. It was designed to be dry during the winter months, during our dry season, and it floods during the summer rainy season. And that's much like the Everglades. So the plant selections that we made for this river of grass were based on the flora of the Everglades. Not only creates a realistic ecosystem, but it provides that seasonal function. These plants can survive that cycle of drought and flooding that the plants in the Everglades are able to survive. Provides that seasonal function. So you can't really visit our garden without seeing the stormwater system in some way. It's really incorporated into nearly every facet of the site. And it begins in our parking lot and it journeys all the way through our site to our natural areas. So everything that you see in the garden in some way, you're seeing part of our stormwater system. In fact, when we host bands and performances in the garden, they typically take place on our water garden stage. And the view shed for this venue is across our river of grass, that big rain garden, towards the sunset. This means that concerts in the garden typically take place viewing our stormwater system. I put that in contrast to that turf grass detention basin that I showed earlier a couple slides back. I can't imagine going to a concert somewhere overlooking something that looks like that as opposed to our stormwater system here. This has all been wildly successful for us as a garden, and this system has won several local, state, and national awards. But more importantly, it's brought attention to the idea that stormwater can have both form and function, that it can be healthy, resilient, and contain diverse ecosystems that buffer our home landscapes and our built environment from the natural lands, from natural resources. They can also be beautiful. We're a botanical garden. We've designed these to be attractive and beautiful. We want them to be something that you, when you visit, you fall in love with, and you want to take that home to your own community and to your own backyards. So all of these accolades are great, all of these awards, but really the true sign of success, the true testament comes from the wildlife that use our stormwater system. This is a photo from 2018, and it is of a mother panther and her 2 kittens using the trail around our stormwater system. This is planted with plants. This trail goes all the way around our stormwater lakes, and they walk that every evening. They were here for almost the entire summer. They stayed, they hunted wildlife that used those grassy edges of those ponds. And this is really incredible. There's less than 150 of these animals left on Earth of the Florida panther, and 3 of them spent the summer here. So we have multiple images like this of these 3 panthers. We also see bobcats. We had a bobcat run out of our natural areas through the formal gardens and hid in the river of grass for an entire day. One of our volunteers saw it and saw it run into the river of grass. And our entire stormwater system has become a birding hotspot. Our birding tours are really popular here, and they follow the journey of water through the garden. And in fact, our birding tours the first stop is our parking lot. And usually by that point in time, we've spotted a dozen or more species just in our parking lot, stormwater areas. And because of this, our stormwater, we've become one of the top birding spots in the county because of these diverse ecosystems and habitats that we've created in our stormwater system. So this is another positive that we're seeing come from that form and function of planted stormwater systems. So before we move on to the ecological functions that a well-designed native stormwater wetland planting can provide, I'm going to define some of the terms that I'll use. And the first is littoral or littoral zone. And the littoral zone includes this transitional area between the open water that you see in the right of this picture and the upland area. That zone between those 2 areas is called the littoral zone, that transitional zone. And it's really a continuum between deep water and the uplands. And I like to include even further onto the uplands, a buffer area at the top edge of the slope that goes into the lakes. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go into some of the plants and some of the concepts. The other definition that I want to give is rain garden. And a rain garden is a planted, shallow depression in a landscape that captures water and holds it for a short period of time. And this, by having this contact time in a rain garden, it allows the ecological processes in this wetland to occur and provides a buffer against flooding downstream. So a rain garden provides significantly more function. Think back to that image that I showed earlier, that grass-lined dry detention basin. This is so much more beautiful. This is something that I would want to look at. But this also has so much more function. Each of these plants is playing a different role in an ecosystem. They've been put together as building blocks. You really wouldn't see pollinators or small mammals using that grass bowl, but you would see them using something like this. So you keep hearing me say things about ecological functions. So what are those ecological functions that a diverse planted native stormwater area can provide? First, and maybe foremost, is it provides food and habitat for fish and wildlife. I mentioned earlier, our birding tours begin in our parking lot, in the bioswales in our parking lot. They begin in the small wetlands that drain our parking lots. All of the water from our parking lots go into these bioswales. These bioswales provide refuge and food for a number of bird species. And as I mentioned, we often see a dozen or more species just from these parking lot areas. These rain gardens and even littoral plantings open up entirely new ecosystems. And if I know many of you, I'll say the term plant geeks. I say that lovingly. Many of us are plant geeks. And if you have a rain garden or a littoral planting in your home, it opens up entirely new ecosystems of native plants that you can include in your landscapes. And then it opens up opportunities to attract more wildlife to your own home, including hummingbirds, pollinators, and even some small mammals. Other functions and values: improve the aesthetics and improve your property value. Many of these features exist in our landscapes. Many of you, I would imagine, have either a water's edge if you live on a body of water, or you have low areas in your yard where water sits. If not, the water from the roof of your house or from your driveway, that has to go somewhere. Think about where that goes. I think it was Steve Jobs from Apple who famously described a problem with the iPhone as a feature, not a bug. And I often say that stormwater should be a feature on our landscape and not a bug. It should be something that we think of as an opportunity to create ecosystems. Stormwater is not sexy, but it can be. For us, it's become the backbone for our garden. We can improve both the form and function by converting these lawn areas to diverse flowering native plantings. We can turn stormwater areas into attractive features with true ecological function. Native stormwater plantings also can be used to control erosion and stabilize shorelines. And we usually consider erosion as something that happens as water moves over the landscape and wears away soil. But if you live on a pond or a body of water, there's another type of erosion that we think about. And that is as wind blows across a lake, quite often it creates small waves that can erode the shoreline. If you live along a creek or a canal or a river there in North Carolina, you'll see this as water moves. If we don't have diverse native plants along the water's edge, we can get erosion from within that body of water. So a diversity of native plantings provides structure in the soil to help hold the soil in place. Some other functions that stormwater plantings can have. If you live along a body of water, littorals can act as a buffer between the uplands and the open water. Littoral and upland buffers prevent things like grass clippings and other green waste from your yard from polluting the water. They also, they act as a visual buffer. In the photos that I showed that have turf grass right down to the edge of water, quite often those get fertilized or mown, and excess nutrients from the grass clippings or from fertilizer go right into the body of water. But when you have a native planting, it acts as a visual buffer so that when you or landscapers are fertilizing, they stop fertilizing along that edge. It also prevents that grass when they mow from going into that body of water. Stormwater plantings, native stormwater plantings can remove, prevent, and sequester pollutants. Native plant species, they're all a little bit ecologically different. They uptake water, nutrients, and pollutants at different rates. So a diversity of native plantings is important because not only is it more resilient, but it provides multiple layers of function in sequestering nutrients and pollutants from stormwater. And finally, native stormwater plantings can reduce flooding downstream. That above ground structure slows water down and allows some of it to recharge into the groundwater or evaporate into the atmosphere through evaporation or evapotranspiration. Rain gardens are great for this, holding extra water so that it doesn't go right into the rivers and then into flooding our streets, flooding our lakes, causing damage to our communities. So this is the point in my presentation where I usually share the steps that you would use to do this in your own home or your own community here in Southwest Florida when I do this presentation locally. But since many of you, most of you, almost all of you live within the Triangle in North Carolina, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. So the concepts for doing this, for creating a beautiful and functional stormwater garden are the same everywhere around the globe. And those are use native plants. You have some incredible diversity of native plants in the area that could be used in a stormwater system. Non-natives can easily become invasive. They can spread. They can be moved as water moves across the site into other areas. So it's important that we focus on using native plants in these areas. And many of you, as members and advocates for native plants as a part of the North Carolina Botanical Garden, many of you, this is something I'm preaching to the choir that I know. As you create your own rain garden or literal planting or stormwater garden, build an ecosystem. This is something that I challenge each of you to do, even as you landscape in your own yard. Think about the ecosystems in your community, around North Carolina. Each of those plants that's in those ecosystems comes together to have a function. When I plant my yard, I not only think of beauty, but I have to always step back and make myself think about what is the function of this plant? What is the function that it's going to bring to my yard? And when I step back and look at my plantings in my own yard, I think about that not only from how beautiful it is, but from a function standpoint. What are the ecosystem building blocks that I've brought in to create a diverse ecosystem in my yard? So how do you go about doing this, about building an ecosystem? Visit natural areas. Go on a hike. Go visit areas around your home, natural areas. There's also some great online guides for North Carolina for building, using native plants. But most importantly, visit your local botanical garden. Visit North Carolina Botanical Garden. This is a great opportunity to explore your plant palette for your region. Explore a more wider plant palette by looking at wetlands and not just uplands for your own yard. Manage a stormwater area, a rain garden well during establishment. This is really a big key to success. We typically want to keep organic matter out of stormwater areas because that's a pollutant. But it is okay to mulch. If you have a rain garden, it's okay to mulch that in the beginning. We typically don't want to put a lot of mulch and organic matter into the system. But when you're getting it established, we want to help prevent weeds until those plants that we plant are large enough to outcompete weeds. And this actually, even by putting mulch in there, we can actually help to prevent the use of herbicides, which is another pollutant that we want to keep out of our stormwater system. If you manage it well during the establishment phase, it'll pay off as down the road as this matures. And the system, your stormwater system, your littoral areas, your rain gardens, will change over time. If you plant it and do it right as an ecosystem, that ecosystem will mature. Some of the plants that you plant will wane. You won't see them as much. You'll see them maybe move to an area that gets more water. If they're more adapted, they'll seed into that area, or they'll grow through rhizomes to adapt to the areas that they most want to be in your stormwater system. Other things will happen. You'll get, as the roots grow, you'll get more organic matter in the soil. That stormwater system rain garden will change over time. If you're planting the banks along a river, that'll change over time as the river moves. I know you've got some river streams and channels in the area. And if you're on a lakefront, that'll change. The water chemistry changes over time. Water chemistry changes throughout the year. So manage adaptively. How you manage it one way today may change next year, 10 years down the road. And finally, limit nutrient and organic litter input. Do not fertilize. You might fertilize the plants a little bit as you get them started, just to get them to grow in and outcompete weeds. But you don't typically need to add fertilizers after that. That can become a pollutant. Keep mulch, grass clippings, keep that out of the area once you get this established and have it going as an ecosystem. So here, I'm at a point where I always want to share my favorite wetland plants from when I give this presentation here in Naples. I always want to share my favorite wetland plants that you can include. But this is different. You're in North Carolina. So I do have some favorite native plants there. And as plant geeks, I know we all like to talk about and have our favorite native plants. And of course, one of those for many of us is swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. Many of us have this in our landscape or want to be able to grow this, and it likes to have wet feet. This is a perennial plant. It can grow from about 2 to 4 feet. Has these beautiful, deep pink colored flowers that get white centers, and it blooms throughout the summer and fall months. If you have a small rain garden in your yard, this is one that is a magnet for monarchs, hummingbirds, and bees. You'll always see, in fact, in this photo, if you look closely, there's a bee visiting one of the flowers. So if you put in a rain garden in your home or plant along an area that gets wet, this is a great plant to incorporate. Another one of my favorites in your area is turtlehead. It's got, apparently the flowers look like a turtle's head, but the scientific name for this one is Chelone glabra. This plant likes partial shade. So if you have an area, a rain garden that you put in partial shade, or along a creek in a forested area, this is a great one to plant. It gets these beautiful white flowers. It blooms throughout the summer months and into the fall. And some purists native plant purists don't like to plant cultivars, and some do. There are several cultivars of turtlehead that are available, and the flower color ranges from a gorgeous pink to this white color. So again, this is another one that if you plant, it likes wet feet. You typically need to have a wet area, but it attracts butterflies and hummingbirds. One that I wish we could grow here reliably in Southwest Florida is cardinal flower. This is a gorgeous plant, Lobelia cardinalis. Bright red, it's the color of the flowers are the color of a cardinal. These bright red flowers, typically, as I spend time across the Midwestern US, you can see these as you visit wetlands. You see these from 100 foot away. They're so bright. These gorgeous spikes, 2 to 4 foot tall spikes, are great plants to attract hummingbirds. They're magnets for hummingbirds. And then finally, I'll share one of my other favorites. And I think I've said all of these plants are my favorite. They can all be our favorites, right? Spice bush. This is Lindera benzoin. And this shrub provides yellow color in the spring and fall through its flowers, its yellow flowers, and its yellow foliage. But more importantly, this is a host plant for the spicebush swallowtail. This is a great one to include. It likes to have wet feet, but I've planted it in drier areas. One of my favorite facts about this plant is that it's a relative of the avocado. It's in the Laraceae family. But as a member of that plant family, it may be susceptible to a new disease that entered the US in the 2000s in Georgia. It's a disease called laurel wilt disease, and it's a non-native pathogen that is moving across the east coast of the United States and killing members of this plant family. One of the ways that we can help to conserve some of these plants is by planting them in our own yards, in our own communities and neighborhoods. So this is a great one. If you plant this, you're almost guaranteed to get spicebush swallowtail butterflies. So one of the best ways to learn about some of these plants and which plants you can include in your own stormwater plantings for diversity and for that beauty, for that form and function, is, of course, I have to give a plug, visit your local natural areas, but visit your botanical gardens. They have some great, incredible plantings, and you can find color combinations. You can learn from the education team there what plants do well in what areas. And I highly recommend a great resource for your area is North Carolina Botanical Gardens FloraQuest. And if you are interested right now, you can get to that through your smartphone. If you point your camera at this QR code, it should take you to the website, and you can use that as a resource. There's multiple different search functions there. But this is a great way to find other plants for your area. I'm really curious too. One of the things that I like to do is ask you, the participants, what are the resources that you have for native plants, for native ecosystems, for native landscaping, for stormwater? So if you have a great resource that we could share with everybody that's in the presentation today, please share that in the chat now if you could. If there's a favorite website, or even if you have a favorite plant, please drop that into the chat. And with that, I will end the presentation portion here, and I believe we can open up for questions from here. I'll turn it back over to Lauren.
I'll take over this portion, David here. We have a couple of questions that came in, but feel free to add any more as you have them. This first one came back when you were talking about the algal blooms. Are those all bad, or can they be a valuable part of the ecosystem if they're not excessive?
So we know these algal blooms happen. They're a natural phenomenon. We know that we happen in systems. They're not always bad. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily good. They're part of a natural cycling in these systems. But when they're bad, some of the algal blooms can produce toxins and neurotoxins. That's the thing down here with red tide that makes us cough. When they do produce neurotoxins, they can make these bodies of water toxic. And there have been instances across the US where pets, especially dogs, have swam in some of these ponds and gotten really sick or died. We also get fish kills. So I don't want to say that they're necessarily can be a good thing. They're natural processes, but again, fertilizers make them worse, and they make those bad algae blooms worse.
Thank you for answering that. So here in especially the Piedmont area, the Triangle, we are surrounded by these very tall trees. So a lot of us have very shaded yards. Yeah. Do you have any advice for planting rain gardens in the shade?
Since I'm not local to the area, I know many of the plants in the area, but not well enough to provide some great recommendations. Although I will say that my good friend Dan Stern, there from the North Carolina Botanical Garden, just dropped a link in the chat to a North Carolina Botanical Garden curated list of plants that tolerate wet feet. So that's a great resource that you can use to find. And you're very lucky because you have all of these forested areas. You have a greater diversity of shade plants that shade that tolerate shade and like to have wet feet. So there's a great number of plants there.
Wonderful. And I'll also plug on November 5th, it's a Friday, we're going to be hosting a Rain Gardens class. That's going to be led by Robert Meehan of the Ellerby Creek Watershed Association. So if you're interested, I will find a link for that and share that in the chat as well. We also offer some regular programming on shade gardening. So for those of you interested, can share that as well.
Awesome. That's great. That's fantastic.
I am not seeing any other questions at this point, but feel free to plug those in if you have any more for Chad.
I'm curious. I saw when I did the Google search for algal blooms there, I saw that there was one this summer. And I looked back through the history. If anybody in our presentation today, I'm curious if this is something that you're seeing in your communities or you're hearing about in your region. It's certainly something that we're seeing here in Florida. It's become one of our #1 environmental issues here. So I'm curious.
Yeah, feel free to post that in the chat if you've noticed any algal blooms in our area. This is not something that I've been following personally, but now I will be paying attention to that. And just a question I had during your presentation, does the Naples Botanical Garden have any fencing around it? Like how do these panthers and bobcats get in?
No, we don't have any fencing. Just south of our garden, we're connected. We're very lucky. We have 90 acres of natural lands here. And like your garden, much of our garden is native plants, not entirely. But we're connected then to 110,000 acres of Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. And if we continue on around from there, we go through hundreds of square miles of natural areas all the way around to the Everglades. So a panther could very realistically walk from the Everglades to our site. And we get that quite often as they move around. They have these huge home ranges of over 50 miles, especially the young males. So we get everything from panthers, bears, bobcats. One of the wildest things that I've seen in the garden is pythons. We captured a 9-foot python. We have these in the Everglades now. They're not native. They move through some of these areas and they've bred and their range has expanded. We caught a 9-foot python in our garden. All of our team has been trained to capture pythons. And then we found a baby python a few days ago. Was about 3 foot long. And we know that one mother can have up to 80 eggs per clutch is what I've been told. So that one baby that we found, there could be 79 brothers and sisters out there. So again, going back to native ecosystems, we want to create healthy native ecosystems using native plants, but then we also manage against native plants and manage against invasive plants and invasive wildlife like the python.
Well, I'm going to be canceling my trip now. I do not want to run
humans.
into.
They avoid humans. So yeah.
Good to know. Good to know. And do you have a deer problem in Florida?
We don't have a deer problem as much as you might have there. The deer here, quite often, as you move more towards tropical climates, mammals tend to shrink in size. So our deer are much smaller in size. And in fact, as you go down to the Keys, there's another species in the Florida Keys called the key deer, and they're 2 to 3 foot tall. They're very short. So the deer that we have here, they're smaller, and we just don't seem to see as many of them. One of the things that helps with that is panthers. The panthers take out a lot of the deer. They're good. We love seeing panthers. We know that they keep the gardens healthy.
That goes back to what you've been saying about creating an ecosystem. And I've been copying into the chat for everybody. Some different people have put in some great links. Awesome. And we had one more question pop up asking about native ferns as good plants for rain gardens.
Again, since I'm not there in the area doing botanical and ecological work there, but I will say a couple that are some of my favorites that I believe do well in that area and I believe are native to your area are cinnamon fern and royal fern. They're both plants that like wet feet. They'll grow in shade. I've grown them here in full sun, and I've grown them in shade here in South Florida. They're fantastic for spreading across an area, but without being so aggressive that they take over. And they're beautiful. They have a gorgeous color to them. And then when they become fertile, they have these great stalks that are very attractive in a kind of an off brown color, but another great plant. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are both native here. We have both of those growing here at the garden. Pretty impressive cinnamon fern collection in our coastal plains area.
Awesome. That's wonderful. And I'm sure that there's some other great diversity. There's some plants like caryxes and sedges. If you really get into this and geek out, there's so many great and wonderful grasses, sedges, rushes, beautiful flowering plants that you can put in. And I challenge everybody to just get as much diversity into your yard as possible. That's function, that brings in wildlife, healthy ecosystems.
And we do actually have a class this fall specifically on ferns from one of our horticulturalists.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Chad, for sharing about yet another reason to plant native species. We really appreciate you tailoring your content to not just North Carolina, but to our garden and making some great connections for us. We're really grateful for your knowledge and your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's been fun.
Thank you all for joining us. And join us for future virtual Lunchbox talks on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of each month. If you're not currently a member, we hope you'll consider becoming a member. Membership is critical to our mission. And thank you all for attending. I hope to see you at the garden soon. Thanks again, Chad.
Thank you.